With kings, you show reverence, humility, honor. But I had no intention of doing that with this child. We weren't looking for a Messiah, just seeking to satisfy our curiosity. You understand? Let's see if A plus B can equal C. So this curiosity led me and my companions to the one they claimed to be a king. I must tell you, I'm not moved by emotion. Skeptical for the most part. My colleagues say cynical. Maybe they're right. I deal in logic. Maps. Stars. Books. History. So we followed the star. We found the mother and father and the boy they called Jesus in Bethlehem. Yes, I was expecting a child, but, well, there he was. The boy who drove Herod mad, who held command to armies of angels, who lured peasant shepherds away from their sole livelihood. This child they claimed to be Messiah. Like I said, a king in my own right, had no intention of bowing to this child. I was bound only by curiosity. But then I saw him. And I felt a fascination. Something unmistakable. Something I had never seen with my own eyes. Divinity. Since the beginning of time, kings have invented their own wild mythologies of their birth. But this king's birth was foretold by prophets long before he took his first earthly breath. Other kings spread tales through their kingdoms of their triumphs and valor. But this king said nothing. Legions of angels spoke for him. I think of him every day. How I went to satisfy my curiosity and found the answer I didn't know I needed. A Messiah.
Got a question for you this morning, and I want you to take it seriously. I want you, as we're having this time talking together this morning, I want you to just continually roll this question through your mind. What fascinates you? What is it? What fascinates you? Like, what is that thing that when you think of it, you sit there and you go, oh my goodness, I cannot believe that this exists. I cannot believe that I got to experience. I cannot believe that I got to watch that. What fascinates you? And obviously, considering where we're sitting right now and considering that we are, starting off the season that we call Advent, I'm going to follow that up with the question of, are you fascinated by Christ? Are you fascinated by the story of this God who came down to earth to live among us and to live just like us, to be, one of us? Are you fascinated by a God who would do that so that he could know us better, so that he could walk with us, so that we could understand him just a little bit better, so that he could eventually give his life for us? After doing all sorts of miraculous things that blew people away, are you fascinated by that God? Last week, I was able to be at State Youth Convention, which was exciting for me to be able to do that. you're getting sick of me mentioning that I was a youth pastor for a long time, and so, it was cool to be able to jump back into that world. But I looked around and I got to see these students who were just, without abandon, worshiping, who were excited to hear what message might come, who heard it in maybe different ways than they would normally hear it on a Sunday morning in the churches that they go to and the congregations that they attend, to hear different styles of speaking, to see different styles of worship, to have different styles of all sorts of different things going on. But I also, because of the time that I lived in that world of, eating and drinking and breathing youth ministry, I know the temptation that comes into those moments of we're looking for the big, fascinating moment that'll cause us on Saturday night to have those tears flowing down our faces. As I was able to walk in the world of actually planning international youth conventions and state youth conventions and camps and everything, we kind of jokingly refer to, and I'm letting you in on a little bit of the inside track here, we kind of jokingly refer to that night as cry night. Like, that's the night when everyone gets emotional and they start talking to one another. And we don't say that in the sense of, okay, how are we going to tug on people's emotions so that we can get them to cry on such and such a night? But we know it's coming because it happens every single time. But what happens when we leave that moment, when we leave camp, when we leave youth convention, and we go back to normal life, and cry night ends up being in the rearview mirror? Are we still fascinated by Jesus? Are we still fascinated by the stories that we read and the Spirit that we get to encounter each and every single day? Or do we begin to lose a little bit of that? I can't remember where I stumbled across this quote, but if you go to my office, you'll see, just in plain printed paper, because I'm not fancy like that, but you'll see a quote on my door that says, once you lose your fascination, you lose your effectiveness. That once you get to that point where you're just not excited about something anymore, where you don't wake up in the morning and go, man, I'm so glad that I get to do such and such. I'm so glad that I get to experience such and such. Then you start to lose your effectiveness. And when I ran across this quote, I know that it was dealing primarily with our jobs and the places that we work, that once we lose that excitement about having a position or a new job or whatever it may be, we begin to become less effective because it becomes just about collecting a paycheck or just about checking off a list the things that we needed to do today. And so we actually get to the point where we're better at what we're doing, but we're less effective in the end product because we just don't care as much about what we're doing anymore. We're not excited about it anymore. I mean, there's all sorts of different areas of our lives that we can lose our fascination. You get married, and it's like, man, this is the most amazing thing in the world. And then you realize that a year or two down the road, like, oh, this is the person for the rest of my life that I'm going to be with. And we can begin to lose that initial fascination that we had with the other person. In the dating world, you hold a hand, you're like, bam, fireworks going on. But eventually you're like, it's just a hand. It can become. Thankfully, Sarah's not sitting over here right now. You have that first kiss. Eventually you want more than just the kiss. The fascination can start to fade if we allow it to start to fade. And the same thing can happen with our fascination, with our excitement, with our astonishment that we have that this God would come and live among us and care enough about us that he would become one of us. And eventually it just becomes something that we've been told over and over and over again. And it becomes something that we've told others over and over and over again. But now all it really is we're going to come to church on Sunday morning if it's convenient, and maybe we'll get our kids there on Wednesday night. Maybe occasionally we'll dust off the top of that Bible and we'll read the Christmas story to our kids, or Easter will come along eventually and we can read that story also. And it just becomes it's not that exciting anymore. I got to live in Colorado for 4 years, in Fort Collins, Colorado, where to the west of the city, you have this beautiful Rocky Mountain scenery. And I remember our pastor would remind us over and over and over again, if you don't look at that mountain and think about the majesty that is present when you look at that mountain, and think about the crazy act of creation it took to bring that mountain into place, if you don't stop and be thankful for that mountain each and every single day, eventually you won't see the mountain anymore. And when I moved there, I thought, that is the most ridiculous thing you could ever say. I grew up in Kansas. Of course I'm going to recognize that mountain for the rest of my life. Kansas is flat. They did a study one time. I don't think they did it correctly, but they did a study one time showing that Kansas is literally flatter than a pancake. Somebody's making some super lumpy pancakes. I'm just throwing that out there. But I thought, there's no way I'm going to forget about that mountain. And by the time I'd lived there for 4 years, I realized I forgot about that mountain. I would drive to work every day, into the office, and I wouldn't pay any attention to that beautiful mountain that was over there. What fascinates you? Are you fascinated by this story that we celebrate often, right after we get done with Thanksgiving, and before we get into the new year, we spend this time and we celebrate this story that we should be celebrating all year round, but let's at least for this moment spend the time in this. Are you fascinated by this story? In Luke chapter 8, if you want to open up there, you can. If you want to write it down there, you can. I'm not going to read it word for word. But in Luke chapter 8, we run across a story where Jesus is approached by a man named Jairus. Jairus is a leader in the synagogue, and Jairus comes up to Jesus and he says, hey, my daughter's sick, and I know that if you are willing, then you are able to make her well again. I want you just for a second to put yourself in the shoes of that father as you're coming up to Jesus. Your son or your daughter is deathly ill. And you know that there is this man who can heal her if he's willing. And so you're coming up to him, and so often I think we read this story and this man just walks up to Jesus and says, hey, if you've got the time, do you think you could handle maybe healing my daughter? But no, this man is coming up to Jesus and he's saying, Jesus, if you are willing, would you please heal my daughter? I know that you can do it. He saw this man that as a synagogue leader, he's supposed to be hating this Jesus. He's supposed to be plotting for ways to kill this Jesus. But he sees that Jesus is a man who could heal his daughter, and he is blown away by all the things that he's seen to the point that it has punched through his own hatred of Jesus. That it has punched through the synagogue's hatred of Jesus to the point that he realizes this man can get it done. And so he comes up to him and he says, please, would you do this? And so Jesus begins to walk to Jairus' home, but on his walk to Jairus' home, we read that he is suddenly surrounded by people who are fascinated by the things that he has done, who are blown away by the things that he has done, who believe that he can do great things because they have seen him do. We sang that song to start everything off this morning, that he's done great things. They believed it. I wonder sometimes if we still believe that he can and will and did do great things, or if we've started to lose a little bit of our fascination with him. These people haven't. And these people are surrounding him, and we read that at one point, a woman reaches out, and she grabs onto his robe as he walks by. A woman who, it says that for the last 12 years has experienced bleeding. and the discomfort that goes with it. I remember when I was a kid, I didn't understand what this meant by bleeding. I just thought it meant like, honestly, I don't know what I thought it meant. Like maybe she cut herself and she was, it just never stopped or something. My child mind, who had 4 brothers, didn't catch what this meant. Women in the room, you'll understand this better than the men in the room. But for 12 years, this woman had been on her menstrual cycle. For 12 years, she had experienced the discomfort that comes with that kind of bleeding. The emotions that sometimes come with that time, the physical discomfort that comes with that time, and in that culture, the uncleanliness that comes with that time. For 12 years, she would have been required to let people know, I'm unclean. I'm unclean. Not be able to sit in the spot that any man might sit. For 12 years, this woman had been experiencing this. And so when Jesus walks by, she is so full of hope. She is so full of astonishment by what he's done and what he can do that she reaches out and she grabs onto his robe, just thinking that maybe touching his robe will be enough to heal me of this. And Jesus, walking along, stops. Remember, he's walking to go heal a little girl, and he stops. He says, "Who touched my robe?" Because I just felt power go out of me. Her faith in him was so strong that just touching his robe was enough to heal her, and he recognized it. He saw this woman who was unclean. And as soon as she realized that he was talking about her, it says that she sat there trembling before him. Trembling before the man who she could already feel the healing going on inside of her because of him. When was the last time you trembled before the Lord? When was the last time you recognized that his power is so strong? His love for you is so strong that you can't even handle the thought of it without trembling before him. And just so you know, I'm asking you these questions. I'm asking myself the same questions at the same time. When was the last time that I was so blown away by something that he did that I trembled before him? Jesus eventually goes on, but a messenger comes up to them as they're walking to this little girl's home and says, "Don't bother. She's dead. She didn't make it." And you can imagine the heartbreak that Jairus feels at this moment. Man, maybe if Jesus hadn't taken so much time with that woman, maybe if Jesus had paid more attention to my wants and my needs, maybe if he had done the thing that he acted like he was going to do in the first place, maybe my little girl wouldn't be dead right now. Maybe I shouldn't have ever put that kind of faith in him in the first place. Should have known he had too many other things to take care of. But Jesus doesn't stop and say, "Well, I'm sorry. I tried to get there, but I didn't make it." No, instead it says that Jesus walks to the girl's house, and they tell him again, she's dead. And he looks at him and says, No, she's not dead. She's only asleep. You know what response they give him when he says that? They laughed at him. A man who had done all of these amazing and crazy things, they had already forgotten about the power that he had, and they laughed at him over his statement that she's only asleep. Jesus eventually walks into the girl's room, And he walks up next to her bed. He only takes Peter, James, John, and the father and the mother into the room with him. And he looks at the little girl, and he says, "Little girl, wake up." Has anyone in here fallen asleep? Do you feel like maybe there's a possibility that you're falling asleep? So for my alarm these days, I use this thing right here on my wrist. It doesn't make any noise. It buzzes my wrist. And somehow, I still don't fully understand it, that this little buzz wakes me up. It is the most gentle wake-up call that I've ever felt or heard in my life. I mean, it literally just sits there and bzz, bzz. It's not even enough to wake Sarah up laying right next to me. It just wakes me up. But there's this beautiful little feature on it that our alarms have had for years called the snooze button. And this particular snooze button goes for 9 minutes. So when I set my alarm in the morning, I set it in 9-minute increments. I'm like, okay, I'm probably going to hit the snooze this many times, and so I need to set my alarm 27 minutes before I actually want to get out of bed in the morning. Now, I set it most mornings for 5:30 in the morning because I have this grand plan of I'm going to get up and I'm going to get my day started, and I'm going to go, I'm going to do a workout, I'm going to study, I'm going to be, all these things are going to be done and finished by the time my kids get out of bed so that I can make sure that I'm there to help them get ready for school and everything. And then I'm not sitting there later on in the day going, man, I really need to do those things. Those things are important. The problem is that because it wakes me up so nice and gentle, I have a tendency to hit the snooze too many times. And after the third time, it just shuts off. It sits there, I think it's just like on my wrist, and it's like, well, I give up. You're obviously not getting out of bed this morning. I've read the studies that show that it's actually better for you physically and mentally to not use a snooze button, to just get up when your alarm goes, which makes perfect sense. For one, you're going to get the maximum amount of sleep if you just get up when the thing goes off. You're not setting it 27 minutes ahead of time and losing out on 27 minutes of sleep. But there's all sorts of other things going on that we won't get into there. So over and over again, I've set my alarm for 5:30. Then I started setting my alarm for 5 because I'm like, okay, if I set it for 5, then maybe I'll actually get up at 5:30. You know what happens? At 5:30, my alarm says, I give up. And then at 6:30, I wake up and I get out of bed. And it's too late to do any of the things that I wanted to do on the day. Now, my girls, they have alarms too. We use the Alexa devices, and hopefully I didn't just wake up any of your Alexa devices by saying that word. But we use the Alexa devices to wake them up, the little echoes in their room, and they each have their own personalized wake-up call that I choose for them. They absolutely love them, let me tell you. They are the most annoying alarm clocks that I can possibly find because I'm that kind of a dad. And so I hear them when their alarm starts going off. Keely's room is right above ours, and I hear her going, Alexa, stop! And Alexa keeps on going, Alexa, stop! Like she gets to this point where she's pleading with Alexa to please stop telling me to get out of bed. But you know what happens? Keely wakes up. And while she's not in a good mood, she's awake. And she's ready to go with her day. And usually by the time she walks down the stairs, she's in a pretty good mood. Not every morning. None of us are every morning in a good mood by the time we walk down the stairs. But usually she's woken herself up. In the military, I don't know if they still do this, but I know they used to wake you up with the bugle call. You know why? Because it wakes you up. Try sleeping through something like that. Now, I had a roommate in college who is now my brother-in-law who probably could sleep through that. I typically had to walk across the dorm room to wake him up when his alarm clock went off. He was just one of those, it drove me crazy. But I wonder if God's sitting here and with a lot of us, he's saying, I need you to wake up. I need you to stop with this little gentle snooze alarm clock vibrate on your wrist kind of a thing, and I need you to get up and to get moving because I see you falling asleep or I see you already asleep. And church, I need you to be awake. I see it when I'm at a state youth convention and, in years past, man, I would see every kid on their feet and they were so excited, and I see some of that starting to wane a little bit. I see that on Sunday morning in every church I've been to, where things are starting to wane just a little bit, where there's other things starting to creep in. And they're starting to pull us away from gathering together. I see it in individual lives where it's I'll get around to reading the scriptures at some point, but right now I've got all these other things that I need to do. I see it in parents in raising their kids, and I am no expert in raising kids, believe me. But I see us sitting there going, I'll talk to them someday, when they understand a little more, when it's a little bit convenient. And I've seen it over and over again that by that point, their kids have already fallen asleep and they can't wake them back up. Or in the process of waiting, the parents fell asleep themselves. And we sit here and we wonder why culture is moving the direction that it is. When we look inside the church, we see that we're falling asleep left and right. We're not alert anymore. I've heard it almost as a source of pride since I've moved here, that, here we're more biblically focused. Sometimes we use the word conservative because we like to lump those things together, and I don't think they should be. But here we're more biblically focused. Around here you can pray at more things. Around here, we're more careful with when we schedule things. But I'm here to tell you right now, that we are, if you look at the trends, we are where the coasts were about 20 years ago. So if you want a good idea of where we'll be in 20 years, look at where the coasts are right now. I don't know how many times I've heard people say, man, those people in Portland are nuts. Look at what they're doing out there in Portland. They are so post-Christian that it's crazy. If the church doesn't wake up, that will be Southern Indiana in about 20 years. We are already a nation that is post-Christian. That's how we're labeled now. We're a post-Christian nation. And I think so much of it has to do with the church first lost its fascination. And then it fell asleep. Will we be the people who wake back up? Who rediscover that first love that we had, that first excitement that we had? When you read that story in Luke chapter 8, after they raised Jairus' daughter, we read the words that her parents were astonished. They were overwhelmed. They were amazed. They were fascinated by Jesus. Depends which translation you read, you'll run into those 4 words. There was no question in their mind. When we sing things like, "Oh, come, let us adore him," do we truly adore him? Or do we sing the song and go, okay, we got our token Christmas song in this year? Courtney, no, I did not say that as a bash on you choosing the Christmas song in there. But do we do that? Or do we truly adore him? Are we truly in awe of him? Are we truly trembling before him? In Ephesians chapter 5, Paul writes to the church in Ephesus, starting in verse 10. If you want to follow along, that's great. If you want to write it down for later, that's great. But I think he gives us some pretty good instruction on how we can wake ourselves up, or how we can keep ourselves from falling asleep in the first place. He says, carefully determine what pleases the Lord. Take no part in the worthless deeds of evil and darkness, but instead expose them. It is shameful even to talk about the things that ungodly people do in secret. But their evil intentions will be exposed when the light shines on them, for the light makes everything visible. This is why it is said, "Awake, O sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will give you light." So be careful how you live. Don't live like fools, but live like those who are wise. Make the most of every opportunity in these evil days. Don't act thoughtlessly, but understand what the Lord wants you to do. Don't be drunk with wine, because that will ruin your life, but instead be filled with the Holy Spirit, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs among yourselves, and making music to the Lord in your hearts. And then I think back to that mountain in Fort Collins, when he says, "And give thanks for everything to God the Father in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ." Carefully determine what pleases the Lord. When I'm driving down the interstate at night and it's dark outside and I've been awake too long, I can't allow myself to become careless. But I have to carefully pay attention to what animal might jump out in front of me, what car might be going too slow in front of me, which in the middle of the night, every car is going too slow in front of me. What turn might be coming up, especially if you're coming from Princeton to Monroe City. What traffic sign I just saw so that I'm going the speed limit. I've got to be careful and alert. The more tired I get, the more intentional I have to be about determining what is right and what I need to do. Awake, O sleeper, rise from the dead. Christ will give you light. And he says it again, so be careful how you live. Make the most of every opportunity. I think so often we go through life and we look at things and we're like, that wasn't really what I wanted. That wasn't that exciting. That wasn't the awesome and the amazing that I'm looking for. We say, no. In every opportunity that comes your way, there is something that you can get out of it. There is something that you can make out of it. Don't waste a single one of them. You want to stay awake? Stop wasting opportunities that are in front of you, that God's putting in front of you. I've heard people say it. I've said it over and over again. I've prayed the prayer, God, put someone in my path today that I can share your love with. And then I drive right past the person that God's probably going, him. I'm like, yeah, but that wasn't that exciting. No, I want the big thing that I can stand up on Sunday morning and I can tell people about, or maybe I can write a book about it someday. I want the big thing. Saying, hey, you want to stay awake? You want to continue to be fascinated by what I can do? Don't waste those kinds of opportunities. And be thankful for everything. And let him know about it. I was reading somebody, I don't remember who it was, but they started this list several years ago where every single day they write down 3 things that they're thankful for. But he said, the rule that I follow with this is I can't write down something that I remember that I've written down before. I literally have to think of 3 new things that I'm thankful for. Now, a year later, I forgot what I wrote down a year ago, so I might start reusing some things. What if we were that intentional about looking for the things that God has put in front of us that we can be thankful for? All those leaves that are falling all over the yard next door. You know what they turn into? Mulch. You know what mulch turns into? Green grass. Now these annoying leaves are actually something that are actually kind of cool and something to be thankful for. Everything. We can look and say, God, what is it that you're giving me, that you're showing me in this moment? Awake, O sleeper. In Revelation chapter 3, that book of the Bible at the very end that we sometimes like to ignore because it's really confusing. We don't really understand what a lot of it means. But he sends a letter to a church, and he tells them this, that you are neither hot nor cold, but instead you are lukewarm. And because you are lukewarm, I'm going to spit you out of my mouth. It would be better if you were one or the other. The most dangerous time to drive, at least for me, I don't have a stat to back this up. I'm just going by my own personal experience, and I think some of you might have the same experience. But the most dangerous time to drive is when I'm starting to fall asleep. When I'm alert, man, it's great. I just got up, I just had my coffee, whatever it might be, and by coffee, I mean milk and sugar with a little bit of espresso in it. Like, I'm feeling good at that point. When I'm super tired, I know well enough that it's time to stop driving, and so I stop. But when I'm in that stage where I'm like, I can make it, it's not so bad, I can go just a little bit further, that's when I'm dangerous on the road. That's when Sarah eventually looks at me and goes, so do you need me to drive? You know, she's waking up from her nap. I'm like, no. Like, you need me to drive? Like, no, I think we can stop for a little while. It's fine. It's the most dangerous time. Jesus tells us, man, if you're not hot and if you're not cold and you're somewhere in that middle, you're in the most dangerous point you can be. And I don't want you that way. But I believe that even in those moments, there is hope for rediscovering the fascination that he once put in our lives, for rediscovering the astonishment, for being able to wake back up. And man, let me tell you, on those rare mornings where I actually do get up at 5:30 and do what it is that I want to do, I feel so good. Not at 5:30. At that point, it feels miserable. But about 6:30, I'm like, I'm so glad that I did that. I'm so glad that I woke up. I feel refreshed. I mean, maybe by 2:30, I'm ready for a nap, but I feel refreshed in the morning. But it takes intentionality. It doesn't just happen because I want it to happen. It doesn't just happen because when I go to bed at night, I say, I'm not going to hit the snooze. But I've got to be intentional about getting up. And I believe we have to be intentional about waking up. Instead of just saying, I'm sure at some point God will wake me back up. I'm sure at some point he'll just show me that. Church, it's time for us to stop hitting the snooze button. And it's time for us to wake up. Are you fascinated? As we sing this last song this morning, I've done this a little bit more lately, I guess, but still not something that I do all the time. I'm going to invite you to get up, and if you're physically able to, I don't care where you move. I don't care if you move to the altar. I don't care if you move to the front row. I don't care where you move. But I want you, if you are looking for that fascination, if you are sitting there and you are willing to admit that I've lost a little bit of that, I've begun to fall asleep just a little bit, or maybe you're realizing there this morning, like, I'm like dead to the world asleep right now. I can't get up at 5:30 in the morning if I don't swing my feet over the side of the bed and straighten my legs out on the floor and start walking across the room. And so this morning, I don't care where in this room you go, but if you're sitting there and you're realizing, I've lost it, I've started to hit the snooze button, I need to be intentional. And I'm willing to admit that I need to be intentional, then move your feet somewhere other than right underneath your seat. As a way of saying, God, I'm ready to wake up. God, I want to be fascinated by you again. And I don't want to count on a musician to give it to me, or a speaker to give it to me, or a book to give it to me. God, I want to rely on you to give it to me. Because all those other things fade away. Eventually, that musician won't be there, that speaker won't be there, that book will finish. God never will. A little over 2,000 years ago, he came down to live amongst us, to become one of us, and they were fascinated and astonished by him. And we can be too.